French armed forces boarded an oil tanker suspected of being linked to Russia after authorities launched an investigation.
Volodymyr Zelensky and head of the UN nuclear watchdog Rafael Grossi say the loss of external power to Zaporizhia's nuclear power plant is concerning.
Special Olympics at the European Commission holds a sports event to promote the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in the EU. French armed forces boarded an oil tanker on Wednesday suspected of being linked to Russia after authorities launched an investigation into the vessel. The Benin-flagged Boracay, anchored off France's Atlantic coast, has been blacklisted by the European Union for being part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet. The EU has sanctioned hundreds of aging tankers used by Russia to circumvent oil exports curbs imposed since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The public prosecutor's office in the northwestern French city of Brest said it had opened an investigation following a report from the Navy. The French Navy said the ship had carried out suspicious maneuvers, had irregularities in its flag documents, and failed to cooperate with authorities. Legal action could include seizure as soon as the ship enters a French or Allied port, and prosecution for breach of sanctions or refusal to comply.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and the head of the UN nuclear watchdog Rafael Grossi have raised concerns about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant's loss of external power supply more than a week ago. The situation raises serious safety concerns at the Russian-occupied plant as the war continues to rage around the facility. Grossi said the plant is currently receiving power from emergency diesel generators to power and cool its 6 non-operational reactors, noting that there is no immediate danger to the site yet. He, however, added that this is not a sustainable method and could prove risky in terms of nuclear safety if it prolongs. Zelensky says the backup generators have never needed to run this long, describing the situation as critical, as he stressed that the plant was not designed to operate this way. The Ukrainian leader slammed Moscow for cutting the power lines to the plant in one of its attacks. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov rejected the accusation, instead saying the power lines were damaged by Ukrainian shelling. Grossi said IAEA inspectors verified that the facility can continue to safely operate on generators for more than 10 days. He also said, however, that he was in touch with Ukrainian and Russian officials about how to swiftly reconnect the plant to the grid to mitigate potential crises.
Denmark, which over the past week has been rattled by a series of drone sightings over sensitive sites, is hosting dozens of European leaders over 2 days. The topics being discussed include defense initiatives such as a possible drone wall, as well as support for Ukraine against Russia. An informal European Council summit with 27 EU leaders on Wednesday will be followed by a gathering of the European political community attended by over 40 European heads of state on Thursday. Danish authorities are taking no chances and have banned all civilian drone flights from Monday to Friday to avoid the risk of confusing enemy drones with legal ones. The timing of the drone sightings in the country should sharpen the minds of EU leaders, whose talks will primarily focus on how to bolster the bloc's defense efforts and how to defend the eastern flank.
The Finnish comprehensive security model really is exclusive to here. It is a way of life, and it has been for decades, given the country's history and the fact that it has a 1,350-kilometre border with Russia, the largest inside NATO. It requires buy-in from all of the community, from NGOs, public sector, private sector, to the army, where military service is required for all young men, to the fact that every Finnish home has to have 72 hours of food, fuel and water supply at all times in the case of emergency, to the concept of psychological resilience in the face of any invasion, to, of course, successive investment in defence by many governments, whether it's the recent drone strategy or the fivefold production in ammunition. This whole country, this whole society is prepared for any war at any time. Shona Murray, Euronews, Helsinki.
Activists on board the global Sumud flotilla headed towards Gaza with humanitarian aid said Israel has begun intercepting their vessels late on Wednesday night. Greg Stoker, an American veteran aboard one of the boats in the flotilla, said around a dozen naval vessels with their transponders off had approached it. The Israeli foreign minister said in a post on X that the Navy had reached out to the flotilla to ask them to change course and to warn them that they are approaching an active combat zone.
Free Palestine!
Israel's foreign minister Gideon Sa'ar called the flotilla a provocation and warned them to stop and transfer their aid through other channels into Gaza. Several flotillas have headed to Gaza in recent months with the aim of breaking Israel's siege and providing much-needed humanitarian aid, and have all been intercepted by Israeli forces.
U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order promising to defend Qatar, even authorizing military action if the country comes under attack again. The move follows last month's Israeli airstrike on Doha that targeted Hamas leadership. The Palestinian group had been meeting in the Qatari capital on September 9th to review a U.S.-backed ceasefire proposal. 6 people were killed, including a Qatari security officer. According to the executive order posted on the White House website, Qatar is described as a, quote, steadfast ally in pursuit of peace, stability, and prosperity, both in the Middle East and abroad. It also states that any attack on Qatar would be viewed as a threat to U.S. peace and security. The order is dated Monday, the same day Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington to formally apologize for the strike. Qatar and the U.S. have close ties, as the Gulf nation hosts the largest American base in the Middle East. And just this week, Qatari mediators helped secure the release of another American from Taliban custody, the 5th U.S. citizen released this year. Adil Halim, Euronews, Doha.
The United States government shut down on Wednesday after lawmakers failed to reach an agreement on how to fund the government. On Tuesday, Senate Democrats voted down the last-ditch Republican bill to extend federal funding for 7 more weeks. As Republicans only have 54 seats in the Senate and need 60 votes, Democrats use that as leverage in an effort to achieve their policy goals regarding health care. Both sides had blamed each other for the imminent shutdown and refused to budge from their positions. Now that a lapse in funding has occurred, roughly 750,000 federal workers are expected to be furloughed or potentially laid off by the Trump administration. Those that stay on the job won't get paid until after the shutdown ends. The last government shutdown lasted for 35 days from December 2018 until January 2019, during Trump's first term as president. That shutdown had been the result of a dispute over immigration and border security.
For European Sports Week, athletes with intellectual disabilities from all over the EU and European civil servants try their hand at bocce and table tennis. The event, organized by Special Olympics at the European Commission, aims to promote the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in the EU. It's an opportunity to challenge persistent prejudices in sport and in society.
People are scared. They don't know how to speak with special people, and they think they are only kids, but we are human beings. We work, we're going to school, we have friends.
People with intellectual disabilities often face stigmatization and isolation, warns the president of Special Olympics Europe and Eurasia.
Regrettably, globally, it's the most underemployed, undereducated, the most unhealthy, regrettably the most trafficked, the most exploited, often the most abused. The plight facing people with intellectual disabilities is scandalous.
In his view, the emphasis must be on education and awareness raising.
Look around you. These people will go back to their offices and they'll have a different understanding of what intellectual disability is. Maybe it's intellectual ability. Maybe it's different abilities. A lot of it has to do with that social education, that awareness raising, the proximity.
Over 20 million people have intellectual disabilities in Europe.